I never thought I'd end up here, working the night shift at a Starbucks in downtown Chicago. Not that I'm complaining, mind you. It pays the bills, and after everything I've been through, that counts for a lot. My name's Jason Keller. I'm 38, divorced, and living in a tiny apartment a few blocks from this place. I don't see my daughter nearly enough, which eats at me every day, but the night shift is steady work, and steady is something I need right now. I used to have a different life. 10 years ago, I was a project manager at a mid-sized tech company. Long hours, pressure to deliver, but the paycheck was good, and weekends meant I could spend time with my family. Then everything unraveled. The company downsized. I was one of the last to go, the kind of layoff that hits you like a gut punch. My wife and I couldn't handle the stress. The separation came quick. My daughter Emily went to live with her mom, and I got stuck in a rut I didn't expect. Jobs were hard to come by, and bills piled up faster than I could handle. I took what I could get, a couple months at a call center, a stint delivering pizzas, and finally this night job at Starbucks. It's not glamorous, but I like the rhythm of the night, the quiet hours when the world feels still. The customers are mostly regulars, night owls like me, and I've learned to read their moods from the way they order their drinks. Still, lately, something about this place has been off. It started small. The coffee grinders would hum for a second when no one touched them. The lights would flicker for no reason. Sometimes I caught shadows moving just outside the window, but the street was empty. I told myself it was stress, loneliness, things your mind invents when it's stretched thin. I needed to shake it off. That night started like any other. The rain was coming down hard, pounding the sidewalks and streaking down the windows. I was wiping down the counters, waiting for the clock to inch past midnight. The few customers that had been here earlier had all left, leaving just me and the soft hum of the espresso machines. At 11:30, the door chimed. A man stepped inside, water dripping off his soaked jacket. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were wide, jittery, scanning the room like he was afraid someone was following him. He was thin, almost gaunt, with clothes that hung off his frame and shoes worn through the soles. I forced a smile. "Hey there, what can I get you?" He didn't answer. Instead, his voice cracked, almost a whisper. "Have you ever killed someone?" The question caught me off guard. I blinked. "What?" He shifted his weight nervously. "Have you ever killed someone?" I laughed nervously, hoping it was a joke. No, I haven't." "Why?" He didn't answer. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to me. Quietly. I didn't mean to. He said I wasn't sure what to make of him. Maybe he was homeless or sick. I tried to keep things calm, asking what he wanted to order. He eventually said black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just black. As I made the coffee, I kept an eye on him. He was muttering under his breath, rocking slightly on his feet. Then, without warning, he dropped to his hands and knees and began crawling toward me. The sound of his breath came ragged and shallow. "I didn't kill him," he whispered. "I didn't mean to." My heart pounded. I took a step back, my hand reaching instinctively for the silent alarm beneath the counter. But before I could press it, he pulled a small, glinting knife from his jacket. Fear hit me like a tidal wave. Everything in me screamed to get out of there. I turned, pushing past the counter and running for the back door. The cold rain slapped my face as I burst into the parking lot, my soaked jacket clinging to my skin. I could hear him behind me, but I dared not look back. My lungs burned as I sprinted toward the street. Some cars were still parked nearby, their drivers staring at me with wide eye, but frozen in place. The man was close enough now that I could hear heavy breathing, wild and uneven. I didn't stop until I saw the flashing lights of a police car turning onto the street. The officers moved fast. They tackled him to the ground before he could come any closer. I stood there shaking, drenched, my chest heaving, as they cuffed him and pulled him to his feet. Later at the hospital, I was told the man's name was Leonard. The officers said he had a tragic history. His younger brother had died in a car crash a few months prior. Leonard blamed himself for the accident. His guilt had spiraled into something dark, twisting his mind until he believed he was a killer, even though the death wasn't his fault. It was hard to wrap my head around how grief could warp a person so completely. That night, I realized that pain often hides behind the most broken faces, lurking in places you'd never suspect. After that night, everything changed for me. I was more alert during my shifts, my eyes scanning every corner, every customer. The job felt heavier, like a responsibility I hadn't signed up for. I'd been so caught up in my own struggles that I hadn't thought about the battles others carried silently. I kept in touch with the police, wanting to know what happened to Leonard. They told me he was admitted to a mental health facility, getting the help he desperately needed. It was a relief, but also a reminder of how close I'd come to becoming another statistic in a tragedy no one saw coming. My relationship with my daughter became a lifeline. I made a point to call Emily every night, to hear her voice and remind myself what I was working for. Those conversations were small lights cutting through the dark, but sometimes, late at night, when the rain taps against the window and the coffee grinder hums softly, I think back to Leonard's haunted eyes and trembling voice. I wonder how many others are out there, lost in their own darkness, just waiting for someone to see them before it's too late. Life goes on, but that night left a mark on me. I learned that people carry pain in ways you can't always see. The man who came into my store wasn't a monster. He was a man crushed by guilt and grief, a man broken and desperate for some kind of peace. The lesson I hold on to is simple but powerful. Kindness and awareness can save lives. A smile, a moment of patience, or a willingness to listen can mean more than you realize. It's easy to get lost in your own problems, but sometimes reaching out to someone struggling can make all the difference. I still work nights, still wipe down counters and make coffee, but I do it with a new purpose. I pay attention now, not just to what people say, but to what they don't say. Because sometimes the real horror isn't a stranger with a knife. It's the invisible battles people fight alone. And when I talk to Emily, I hold her voice close, reminding myself that in a world full of shadows, love and light matter more than anything else. Life is unpredictable, and pain often hides beneath the surface of everyday faces. Compassion and awareness are powerful tools that can help prevent tragedy and bring light into someone's darkest moments. No one fights their battles alone. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of kindness to change a life. It's funny how some nights at Starbucks feel like any other, and some nights stick with you forever. I'm Mark Davis, 29, and for the past 3 years I've been working the closing shift at the Starbucks on 890 Grand Avenue in Seattle. Most nights it's quiet, predictable. Just me, my coworker Liz, and a handful of late-night regulars nursing their last cups before heading home. Nothing out of the ordinary. Before this job I worked in retail management for a few years, then bounced around different gigs trying to find my footing. Starbucks was the first steady job I landed after moving back to Seattle. I like the rhythm of closing up shop, the quiet hum of machines winding down. It gives me time to think, sometimes too much. That Friday night the rain was relentless. Seattle does that, the kind of cold drizzle that soaks you through before you even realize you're wet. The shop was thinning out by 10 p.m. Liz was wiping tables and I was restocking cups when the door chimed. A woman stepped inside, her hair dripping and clothes clinging to her like a second skin. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, pale with dark shadows under her eyes and hands that trembled slightly. She moved to the counter and ordered a tall black coffee, her voice barely above a whisper. Liz and I exchanged looks. This wasn't just a weary customer. Something about her made the whole room feel heavier, colder. She took a seat by the window and pulled out her phone, but her eyes weren't really on it. She kept glancing out, her face tight with worry. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but figured maybe it wasn't my place. Liz told me later she overheard the woman mumbling to herself, phrases like "not safe" and "need somewhere to stay." I thought maybe she was homeless or going through a bad breakup. Seattle's no stranger to people with heavy burdens. As the night wore on, the woman barely touched her coffee. The rain outside softened to a steady drizzle. Around midnight, she stood and shuffled over to the counter again. "Can I stay here for a while, just until the rain stops?" she asked. Her voice was so soft I almost missed it. I blinked. "Stay here?" She nodded, desperate. "Please, I have nowhere else to go right now." Liz and I exchanged uneasy glances. The store closes at 1 a.m. and technically we weren't allowed to have anyone inside after that. But something about her made me want to say yes. "Okay, you can stay until closing," I said quietly. She smiled faintly and went back to her seat. The next hour crawled by slowly. I kept glancing over, noticing how she seemed lost in her own world, whispering snippets about being followed, strange men showing up at her apartment and feeling trapped. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Liz was getting nervous too. "Maybe we should call someone," she said softly. I shook my head. "Not yet. Let's see how things go." Then the place started acting strange. The lights flickered, dimming and brightening like a heartbeat. The coffee machine sputtered and died mid-brew, and an icy chill seemed to settle over the room. The woman whispered, "They're here." I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. Footsteps echoed outside, slow, deliberate. I peeked through the blinds but saw nothing but the empty street slick with rain. Suddenly, the back door creaked open by itself. I walked over fast but found no one there. The door was still locked from the inside. My phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen. "Don't trust her." Liz gasped. The woman looked up sharply, eyes flashing cold. She smiled, but it wasn't the faint, tired smile from before. It was sharp, almost cruel. "Who sent that?" I asked, heart pounding. She laughed quietly, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, they don't want me here." The night twisted into something unreal. Shadows danced in corners where there shouldn't have been any. The woman refused to leave despite repeated offers for help. Liz begged me to call the police, but my phone suddenly lost signal, leaving us isolated. Time became a blur. The woman's stories grew darker. She talked about running, hiding, and something chasing her for weeks. I started to wonder, was she the hunted or the hunter? At 2 a.m., a figure appeared outside the window. The woman froze, whispering, "They found me." I swallowed hard, eyes darting to Liz, who looked pale and terrified. Finally, the signal came back. I dialed 911, explaining the strange events and the woman's fear. When the police arrived, the woman was gone, vanished into the night like a ghost. Officers searched the area but found no trace of her. The store reopened days later, but something had changed. The easy rhythm of closing felt fractured, like a shadow lingering in the corners. Weeks have passed, but I still think about that night. The woman who stayed. Was she a victim of something terrible? Or was something else at play entirely? Sometimes when I'm closing alone, and the lights flicker or the coffee machine sputters, I hear a whisper or catch a shadow moving just out of sight. I wonder if she's still here, watching, waiting. That night taught me that not all fears are visible, and not all dangers wear a face. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't explain, the ones that dwell in the quiet moments when you're alone. I've learned to listen more closely, to trust that feeling when something's off, because sometimes the strangers who come into your life bring more than just a story. They bring a warning. Sometimes the shadows we fear most aren't cast by others, but by the unseen battles people carry inside. Compassion and vigilance can help us navigate those dark moments, but it's also important to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Not every story ends clearly, and some strangers leave marks we can't forget. I've always considered myself someone who's careful but not paranoid. My name's Emily Rogers, I'm 33, and I work as a freelance graphic designer in Portland, Oregon. Most days my commute is just a short walk from my apartment to my home office. which means I'm not used to the bustle of the city streets early in the morning. But on this particular day, I had a meeting downtown, an important one that could open doors I'd been knocking on for years. So like usual, I stopped at the Starbucks on NW Everett Street to grab my morning caramel macchiato and collect my thoughts before diving into the chaos. That morning, the air was bitterly cold, the kind of chill that seeps through your coat and settles in your bones. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the few cars scattered around looked frozen under a thin layer of frost. The wind rattled the trees, adding to the eerie stillness. I placed my order, then stepped outside to wait for my drink. The street was quiet except for the low hum of traffic far off and the occasional gust that rattled the branches overhead. That's when I noticed him, a man standing just a few feet from my car. He wore a bulky coat zipped up to his chin and a beanie pulled low, shadowing his eyes. He wasn't just standing there casually. His posture was stiff, tense, and every few seconds he glanced around nervously, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. For a moment, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe he was waiting for someone, maybe his car was parked somewhere nearby, or maybe he was just cold. But that uneasy feeling settled deep in my gut. I took a few steps toward my car, coffee in hand. Just as I reached the door, the man moved suddenly, closing the distance between us in a way that felt too fast, too close. My heart jumped, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Excuse me," he said softly, voice low but urgent. "Do you have a moment?" I froze, gripping my cup tighter. I just need a ride for a bit," he added quickly, almost pleading. Before I could fully register what was happening, he slid the passenger door open and got inside. "Wait, what are you doing?" I whispered, panic rising in my throat. He looked around nervously, eyes darting. "Trouble and I don't know where else to go." "I'm sorry. I didn't want to scare you. I'm just in." I reached instinctively for the door handle to push him out, but he grabbed the keys from the ignition with one hand and held up the other as if to calm me. "Please," he said, voice shaking. "Don't call anyone. I just need to get out of here." A cold wave of fear hit me, but adrenaline followed right behind it. The car door was still open, so I yanked it and bolted out, yelling for help as I ran back toward the Starbucks. Inside, my hands trembled as I dialed 911, my voice shaky but steady enough to give the dispatcher details about the man and where I was. The staff stared at me with concern, some whispering that they'd never seen anything like it before in their years working there. The minutes felt like hours. Outside, I could hear distant sirens wailing through the chilly morning air. I paced behind the counter, unable to sit still. Liz, my coworker, came over and put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "We're gonna get through this," she said softly. Soon, a squad of police cars arrived, their lights flashing and reflecting on the wet pavement. Officers fanned out around the parking lot and the surrounding streets, coordinating the search. Moments later, they caught him a few blocks away, running down an alley with a desperate look in his eyes. He was arrested without incident, but the whole scene left a mark on me. Later, when the officers returned, they told me a little about the man. His name was Mike, and he had a history of drug addiction and petty crimes. Most recently, he'd been on the run after robbing a convenience store. They said he was desperate and scared, which explained his frantic behavior. Knowing this didn't make the experience any less terrifying. The place I'd always considered a safe little haven, a quiet Starbucks parking lot where I could breathe before my day, felt like a trap that morning. Over the next few days, I found myself double-checking my locks obsessively and looking over my shoulder whenever I stepped outside. I kept replaying the moment he opened the door and slid inside my car, like it was a scene from a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. It's been months since that morning, but I'm still not quite the same. I've become more aware, almost hyper-aware, of my surroundings. I never leave my car unlocked now, and I scan parking lots like a hawk before stepping out. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in Starbucks, waiting for my drink, I catch myself glancing nervously at the entrance or the parking lot, wondering if someone else like Mike is watching, waiting. But that day also taught me something important. Safety isn't just about physical precautions. It's about trusting your instincts, listening to that inner voice that tells you when something feels off. And it's about having the courage to act, whether that means calling for help, leaving a situation, or just standing your ground. I can't say I've stopped feeling shaken by it, but I do know I'm stronger for having faced it. Sometimes danger hides in the most familiar places, and strangers can appear when you least expect them. But trusting your instincts and acting quickly can make all the difference. Safety starts with awareness, and never underestimating the power of your own. I never imagined I'd be working overnight at a Starbucks in the middle of Philadelphia, especially not at 32. My name's Nick Reynolds, and 6 months ago, I lost my tech job. The pandemic hit the company hard, and I was one of the first to go. It was a brutal blow, both financially and emotionally. Months of job hunting had turned up nothing steady, just temp gigs and odd jobs. When this overnight shift opened at the local Starbucks on 37th and Market, I took it without hesitation. Something was better than nothing. Nights were slow, too slow sometimes, but I liked the quiet. It gave me space to think, to read, or even pull out my camera and snap photos of the city lights when no one was around. Jenna, my coworker, was the only other person on shift. She'd been there over a year, but lately, something about her felt different. Tired, maybe. An edge of nervousness I couldn't place. The rain was coming down hard that Friday night when I arrived around 11:45. The parking lot was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that can be unsettling. Inside, the scent of espresso and cinnamon filled the air, comforting, yet somehow distant. Jenna was leaning on the counter, scrolling through her phone, a forced smile on her face. "Slow night?" I asked, wiping a table nearby. "Too slow," she said with a sigh. "Honestly, this place creeps me out sometimes." I chuckled, shaking my head. "It's just the overnight shift. Nothing spooky about brewing coffee." She gave me a look that made me pause. Footsteps, whispers. Maybe not. But sometimes I swear I hear things. I shrugged it off. It was probably just the silence playing tricks on her mind, or maybe mine. We settled into the routine, restocking, cleaning, wiping counters. Jenna disappeared into the stockroom to get some supplies. A few minutes later, I heard a faint thud behind me. Curious, I walked over. On a dusty shelf lay a small burlap bag filled with coffee beans, oddly labeled with a brand we never carried. Jenna shook her head. "I didn't put that there." My eyes drifted to the back wall where something caught my attention. A wooden door, half hidden behind crates, looking older than the rest of the store. I nudged it gently. It creaked open, revealing a steep, narrow staircase leading down into darkness. A cold draft curled upward, making the hairs on my neck stand. Jenna and I exchanged uneasy glances but grabbed flashlights from the counter. Together, we descended into the unknown. The stairs groaned beneath our weight, coated in years of dust and neglect. The air was thick, stale, carrying the smell of damp earth and something metallic. Rust, maybe. At the bottom, our flashlight beams landed on the walls. Strange symbols, circles, crosses, and runic shapes were painted in dark red, smeared as if they had been made in a hurry or under duress. I swallowed hard. Jenna crouched beside a corner and picked up an old leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and brittle. She flipped through it carefully, murmuring, "Rituals, sacrifices, an old society, something secret, maybe a cult." I wanted to say this was some kind of prank, but the weight of the moment pinned me silent. Suddenly, from above us, faint footsteps echoed. A whisper floated down, barely audible. "Help. Please." We froze. My heart hammered as I glanced up the stairs. The door slammed shut with a finality that sent a cold wave through me. I grabbed the door, trying to open it, but it was locked tight. Jenna pulled out her phone and tried calling 911, but the signal kept dropping. Muttered, I don't know if they can hear me. Damn it. A flicker of the overhead light startled us, and then a shadow moved along the ceiling. Too smooth, too silent for any person. It began to glide down the stairs, faceless, drifting like smoke. Jenna grabbed my arm, her grip tight with fear. I didn't even want to look. Then, pounding at the front door shattered the tension. Police. Someone must have called them. The shadow vanished like a breath of wind. Officers forced the door open and found nothing but the journal and the strange symbols smeared on the walls. The store closed abruptly the next day. Officially, it was due to a gas leak, but rumors whispered of something darker, something discovered that the public wasn't meant to know. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched every time I worked. Shadows seemed to linger longer. Strange noises echoed in empty aisles. The cold draft from the basement seeped into every corner, no matter how often I closed the door. Jenna quit 2 weeks later, unable to bear the unease. I wanted to leave too, but bills wouldn't wait. I found myself scanning the store obsessively, watching the ceiling for movement, listening for whispers. One night, alone on shift, the flickering lights returned. The soft hum of the espresso machines dipped into silence. Then I heard it, a faint whispering, calling me back to the basement. I resisted the urge to follow. Whatever was down there didn't want to be found, and I didn't want to find it. Curiosity gnawed at me, though. I began digging into the store's history on my days off. The building had been a coffee shop for decades, but before that, it was a meeting place for a secret society, a group rumored to practice dark rituals. Old newspaper clippings detailed disappearances and strange events tied to the site decades ago. Locals whispered about a cult that vanished overnight, leaving behind symbols and mysteries. The journal Jenna found matched the descriptions of texts supposedly written by the group's leader, chronicling rituals and sacrifices to unknown powers. I realized what we'd stumbled on wasn't just an abandoned basement. It was a sealed history of something dangerous, something that might still linger. The police never spoke of what they found, and the store stayed closed. I quit shortly after, moving on to a different job far from Market Street, but the experience changed me. I learned that sometimes curiosity can open doors better left shut. Not all mysteries are meant to be solved. The basement was a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life, darkness can hide in forgotten corners, waiting patiently. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. When something feels wrong, whether it's a strange basement door or an eerie whisper, listen. Because sometimes the scariest discoveries are the ones we make when we think no one's watching, but something always is. Life will sometimes push us into unknown territory, tempting our curiosity and testing our courage. But it's crucial to respect boundaries, both visible and invisible, and to trust the quiet warnings inside us. Fear is not just an obstacle. It's a signal guiding us to protect ourselves from dangers that may not be easily seen. Knowing when to seek answers and when to walk away is a lesson in wisdom, self-preservation, and humility. My name's Derek Marshall. I was 27 when I met Kira on a rainy autumn afternoon in Denver. It was one of those gray days where the sky leaks steady drizzle and the streets glisten wet under the soft amber streetlights. I ducked into the Starbucks on Elm Street to escape the cold, craving something warm to sip while I collected my thoughts. That's when I saw her. Kira walked in like a burst of sunlight. Bright smile, confident stride, eyes that sparkled even beneath the dampness of her dark hair. She ordered a chai latte, her voice soft but sure, and when she turned, our eyes met. I was drinking black coffee, bitter and no nonsense, but somehow her warmth made me want to switch. We talked for a bit about music, books, the art scene downtown. She had this way of making even the simplest moments feel alive. Over the next few weeks, we kept running into each other there, grabbing drinks, sharing laughs, slowly peeling back layers of ourselves. I'd never been a romantic guy, but with Kira, it felt like something new, something electric. She loved painting, spending hours in her cramped studio filling canvases with wild colors and fierce shapes. I admired how she saw beauty in chaos, how she chased passion with no apologies. It was intoxicating. But even then, I could feel the edge beneath her fire, the quick flash of anger, the stubborn refusal to back down. I thought it was just her intensity, part of the package. I was wrong. The first few fights were small, a missed text, a late reply, something silly blown out of proportion. But her teasing sharpened into barbs, and I found myself walking on eggshells. One night at Starbucks, she slammed her cup on the table so hard the ceramic cracked. "Why don't you ever text me back fast enough?" she snapped, eyes blazing. I reached out to calm her, but she pushed my hand away like I was a stranger. I tried to explain, to tell her I wasn't ignoring her on purpose, but her anger was a wave I couldn't hold back. The laughter we'd shared turned into cold silence. The girl who once saw the world as a canvas had started painting shadows. I remember the last time we spoke. The quiet conversation after a fight, both of us exhausted and bruised. We said goodbye without tears, without promises, just a quiet hope that maybe distance would heal what we'd broken. 2.5 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach twist. "Can we meet at Starbucks? I want to talk." I stared at it, heart pounding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, wanted to protect myself from any more pain. But another part, maybe the part that still loved her, wanted closure. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe a chance to reclaim what was lost. I arrived early that rainy afternoon. The familiar clatter of cups and the scent of espresso filled the air, but the warmth felt distant. There she was, sitting by the window, eyes softer but unreadable. I took a deep breath and approached. Before I could say more than a word, a man in a ski mask jumped out from behind the counter. His grip was like iron, and panic exploded through me as he pushed me down. Kira's voice was cold and flat like a knife. "You should have stayed away," she said. My phone was smashed beneath his fist. My arms stung from bruises as I fought against the overwhelming shock, the betrayal cutting deeper than the pain. I couldn't understand it. The woman I trusted, the woman I thought I knew, had set this trap. The police later told me that Kira and her ex Trevor had planned the attack together, jealousy and bitterness twisting what should have been love into revenge. Recovery was slow. The physical bruises faded, but the cracks in my trust didn't. Every time I passed that Starbucks, the memory of that day hit me like a cold wave. Now, when I sit in a cafe, I watch every face, every smile, wondering what secrets lie beneath. Love can be beautiful and dangerous. Sometimes the hardest thing is learning when the person you care about is the one you need to protect yourself from. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, but it must be earned and maintained with honesty and respect. When trust breaks, the wounds run deep, and healing takes time. Sometimes protecting yourself means walking away from what once felt safe. And in the end, learning to listen to your instincts can save you from the most unexpected betrayals. I never imagined that working at a Starbucks on South Main Street in Austin would change the way I see the world, or myself. My name's Sarah Blake, I'm 24, and before that night, I thought I knew what danger looked like. I thought it was something you see in movies or read about in the news, far removed from my late-night shifts wiping tables and brewing espresso. But it turns out danger doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It sneaks in quietly, wearing a hoodie, and shakes your entire life with one breath. I started at Starbucks about a year earlier, after college didn't quite pan out the way I'd hoped. I'd majored in English with dreams of writing novels, but the reality was a mountain of student loans and no immediate job prospects. The coffee shop was a fallback, a place where I could make rent and still write during my breaks. Michael, my co-worker, was my steady anchor. We had a rhythm to our shifts, quiet nights with a handful of regulars, easy conversations, a safe bubble. But that Friday night was different. I remember the air felt thicker, like the humidity had doubled. The usual hum of the espresso machine and soft indie tunes didn't cut through the tension that seemed to settle over the store the moment the man walked in. He wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled low enough to hide most of his face, but there was something in the way he moved that told me he wasn't here for a latte. Michael and I exchanged a glance across the counter. He was the first to notice, his eyes narrowing just a bit. I was wiping down the table closest to the entrance when he stepped to the counter, slow and deliberate, and pulled out the gun. Everyone stay calm. No one gets hurt if you do what I say. His voice was low and steady, like he'd rehearsed this in his head 100 times. The customers froze. There was a stillness that felt unnatural, like the world holding its breath. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Okay," I said. "Just take the money, please. No one needs to get hurt." There was a strange calm to the robber, too calm. And then I saw the tattoo on his wrist, an intricate faded pattern I'd seen before, not close enough to recognize, but familiar. Something about it chilled me deeper than the gun ever could. Then a figure rose from the corner. Another man, hoodie up, sunglasses on despite the dim lighting. He walked up, calm, unafraid. "Hey man, this isn't the Starbucks to do this." The robber froze, eyes darting toward him. The tension cracked for a moment, but then it snapped back harder than before. The gun went into his mouth. I remember Michael screaming, the shot ringing out like a hammer smashing glass. Everything spiraled after that. The days leading up to that night had felt normal enough. I worked full-time, balancing shifts with my half-finished writing project. Michael and I often talked about the slow nights, the regulars we knew by name. Sometimes the local street performers would pop in, or a group of students from the nearby college would come for late study breaks. Nothing out of the ordinary. But Austin's South Main has a darker side too. The neighborhood has been struggling with a recent rise in gang activity and violence. Some nights I'd hear sirens wailing in the distance, but they felt detached, like they belonged to someone else's story, not mine. I didn't know much about the gangs, except what you hear on the news or see in passing graffiti. The tattoo on the robber's wrist was the only clue I had that he was involved in something much bigger. I kept replaying that moment, trying to understand it, the way his eyes shifted when the stranger spoke, the fear that suddenly broke through the mask of control. Michael's reaction haunted me too, his hands shaking, the panic flooding his face when the gun went off. He'd always been the steady one, calm under pressure. But that night broke something in him. After the police arrived and the paramedics took the man away alive but severely injured, everything changed for me. I replayed the scene over and over, trying to make sense of it, wondering what had driven that man to the edge, and why the stranger had shown up at that exact moment. I learned the next day that the stranger was an undercover cop, part of a task force cracking down on the neighborhood gangs. The tattoo on the robber's wrist tied him to a violent gang responsible for multiple crimes in the area. That explained the stranger's knowledge and the tension between them. But it didn't explain the personal edge, the almost intimate hatred I felt between the two men. My workplace felt smaller, more dangerous. I stopped thinking of Starbucks as just a coffee shop and started seeing it as a stage for hidden battles. The aftermath was a blur. Police interviews, paramedics, news crews asking questions I didn't have answers for. Michael took some time off, and I was left to pick up the pieces, to put on a brave face for the customers who kept coming in, unaware, or pretending to be. I started locking the doors early, making sure I was never alone behind the counter. I kept my phone close, programmed emergency numbers on speed dial, and watched every new customer like a hawk. The tension never fully lifted. Every hoodie, every nervous glance felt like a threat. One night, a regular, a woman named Claire, came in and noticed. She asked, "Okay, you look like you haven't slept in days." "Sarah, you..." I nodded, trying to sound casual. It's been a lot." She smiled softly. "You know, you don't have to carry all of this alone, right?" But I didn't know how to explain the fear that had settled in my bones. the feeling that the shadows lurking outside could slip in at any moment. The incident left me with a sharper sense of reality. Danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, waits patiently behind the everyday. And sometimes all it takes is one moment to change everything. I realized that day that safety is a fragile thing, and we often take it for granted until it's gone. I never wanted to be a victim, but I also never wanted to be afraid all the time. There was a complicated line between staying vigilant and letting fear consume you. The city's underbelly is complicated, people struggling with poverty, addiction, crime, but also trying to survive. That robber was a person, broken and desperate. The undercover cop was just doing his job, putting himself in harm's way to protect others. I was caught in between, just trying to make coffee and keep a paycheck. I started volunteering at a local community center, hoping to understand more about the people who lived in the neighborhoods around my store. I met social workers, former gang members trying to turn their lives around, kids with nowhere else to go. Their stories were messy and painful, but real. It gave me perspective. The robbery wasn't just a scary incident, it was a symptom of larger struggles. But that didn't make it any less terrifying or personal. I kept writing in my journal, trying to process it all. My stories shifted, became rawer, more honest. I wanted to capture the complexity of human lives caught in circumstances beyond their control. Months have passed since that night and the scars remain, but they don't control me anymore. Michael returned to work, though he's quieter now, more cautious. The regulars check in with me more often, sometimes offering a smile or a kind word when I need it most. I still lock the doors early, still watch every customer carefully, but the fear has softened into something else. Respect for the fragility of life and the resilience it takes to keep going. That night taught me that horror isn't always monsters or ghosts. Sometimes it's the unpredictability of life, the sudden darkness that walks in through the front door. But it also taught me that even in the darkest moments, people can step in to hold that darkness at bay. I keep that in mind every time I pour a cup of coffee, every time I smile at a nervous customer, every time I lock up at night. Because sometimes the greatest courage is just showing up and facing the unknown. Life can change in an instant. Danger doesn't always wear a mask. It can be someone familiar, someone desperate, someone lost. The true strength lies not in avoiding fear, but in facing it with calm, compassion, and courage, and in understanding that behind every act of violence is a human story, often tangled in pain and survival. The world is complex, and so are we. Holding on to empathy and vigilance can help us navigate the shadows, protect ourselves, and maybe, just maybe, make a difference. I'm Alex Turner. I'm 26, working as a barista at the Starbucks on 1045 Pine Street, Seattle. Nothing fancy, just the kind of job that pays the bills while I finish my degree. Mornings usually start early. I get there before the sun, unlock the doors, turn on the espresso machines, and set up the shop before the rush. It's routine, predictable, a comforting rhythm in a city that often feels anything but. But that morning, the sky heavy and gray, thick fog clinging to the streets. It didn't feel normal. The cold settled deep into my bones as I walked past the usual homeless shelters and coffee shops, watching people shuffle by with heads down and hands stuffed into pockets. Seattle has its beauty, sure, but it also has its broken edges, places, and people society tries to ignore. Outside the cafe, just by the entrance, I spotted her before she noticed me. A woman sitting on the cracked sidewalk, wrapped in ragged clothes, shoulders hunched against the chill. Her forearms caught the weak light, raw and bleeding, dirt caked into fresh wounds. It wasn't the first time I'd seen someone homeless in rough shape around the neighborhood. But there was something about the wildness in her eyes, the way they darted and flickered, that made me pause. For a moment, I debated what to do. Should I call someone? The police? A shelter? But what if she didn't want help? What if it made things worse? Instead, I grabbed paper towels and bleach from the cafe and cleaned the small pools of blood near the door, trying to erase the evidence of her pain. She muttered something unintelligible under her breath, but didn't approach or speak. I tried to push the image out of my head. It was just another hard day in the city. I focused on making drinks, smiling at regulars, counting down the hours until I could get home. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The afternoon dragged by slowly. The lunch rush had ended, and the cafe quieted to the low murmur of scattered customers and soft music. I was behind the counter when the door swung open again. I looked up and saw her. Same woman, but this time she walked in with purpose, eyes blazing with something fierce and broken. "I want coffee. Now." Her voice cut through the air, sharp and desperate. I froze, heart hammering. "You need to leave." "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you can't just come in here like this, please." Her sneer was a flash of rage. I said coffee. Before I could react, she lunged. Her nails scraped across my face, sharp and jagged. A blow landed hard in my side. Customers gasped. Someone yelled. I stumbled backward, clutching my cheek where pain was blooming like fire. Blood trickled down my skin, mixing with the shock pulsing through me. Security came rushing in, pulling her off me. I was trembling, caught between fear and disbelief. How had it come to this? The woman, wild-eyed and frantic, was hauled away, still shouting something I couldn't quite catch. That night, after the chaos died down and I locked up, I caught my reflection in the window, bruised, swollen, scared. But the real damage wasn't just on my skin. Within days, a rash appeared. At first, I thought maybe it was stress, nerves fraying under pressure, but the rash spread quickly, red and raw, itching like wildfire. My skin cracked and peeled, pain blossoming beneath the surface. I went to the doctor, desperate for answers. Tests came back inconclusive. No infection, no allergies, just something strange and stubborn attacking my body. At work, things shifted. Rumors swirled. My manager's smiles became forced, her eyes wary. Customers stared. Some whispered. Hygiene concerns. Safety. I was no longer the friendly barista, but a risk. A problem. A week after the attack, I sat in my manager's office, trembling as she slid a termination letter across the desk. "We can't risk the health of other employees and customers," she said coldly. Losing the job was a punch to the gut. Without income, bills piled up. I couldn't afford rent. Eviction notices arrived like dark invitations to nowhere. The raw wounds on my skin seemed to mirror the growing hole in my life. I ended up in a cheap motel, nights spent staring at my arms, the rash looking eerily like the wounds I saw on that woman's skin. The same angry redness, the same sharp pain. A cold truth settled in. I wasn't just a victim of an attack. I was becoming her, trapped in a cycle of pain and despair I hadn't understood before. I thought about the woman, her wild eyes, her fury, her suffering. I never saw her again after that day, but somehow, her rage found its way into me. Each time I looked in the mirror, I saw a reflection of someone broken and scared, yet surviving. I understood how deep her pain must have been, how loneliness and desperation can twist people until they lash out, not because they want to hurt, but because they're hurting themselves. Life became a slow crawl. I fought to get help, but the system seemed stacked against people like me, those falling through cracks, invisible until something breaks. The skin condition eventually improved with treatment, but the scars, physical and emotional, linger. I found support in unexpected places. Friends who listened, local outreach groups, even strangers who saw beyond the wounds and the story. I took a job at a community center, working with people struggling with homelessness and addiction. I wanted to understand the stories behind the faces, the reasons why someone might snap like that woman did. I learned about trauma, neglect, poverty, the tangled roots of pain that grow deep and dark. What happened that day wasn't just about me. It was about a world that lets people fall so far they have nothing left but anger and desperation. I still think about her. I wonder if she found help, or if she's still out there, hurting. And I've come to realize something important. We're all connected in ways we don't always see. Sometimes, The pain of one becomes the pain of many. Pain and suffering don't exist in isolation. Behind every act of violence or despair is a human being overwhelmed by circumstances they cannot control. Compassion and understanding are the bridges that can heal the deepest wounds. And while fear and anger can divide us, empathy and connection remind us of our shared humanity and the power we have to break cycles of pain before they consume us all. I'm Mia Collins, 25 years old, working the afternoon shift at the Starbucks on 785 Maple Avenue in Chicago. The neighborhood is a whirlwind of life, the clatter of hurried footsteps, the hum of conversation, and the smell of fresh coffee beans grinding every few minutes. Every day brings a parade of faces, students cramming for exams, office workers clutching laptops, and night owls seeking refuge from the city's restless pulse. I've always liked the rhythm, the way the shop feels alive with stories, even if mine had settled into a quiet, predictable pattern. But one rainy afternoon changed everything. The bell above the door chimed softly, and Shane stepped inside. He was tall, lean, with this quiet confidence that made heads turn without him trying. He ordered a black coffee in a voice smooth and low, then settled near the window, pulling out a battered notebook. Watching him write, scribbling quickly, lips moving slightly, I felt a spark of curiosity. Who was this guy so mysterious and intense? Our conversations began as small talk, weather, favorite drinks, music. But Shane had a way with words that caught me off guard. He asked about my dreams, what I wanted beyond the steamed milk and espresso shots. I found myself opening up, telling him things I barely admitted to myself. Then he started leaving notes tucked inside my apron pocket. Poems, little messages filled with charm and warmth. I thought maybe I'd found someone who really saw me. But beneath the sweetness, something darker lurked. The first warning signs were subtle. Shane would make offhand comments that didn't sit right. When I mentioned hanging out with friends, his eyes darkened. "You're lucky I found you," he'd say, smiling, but there was something sharp beneath the charm. I told myself love wasn't perfect. Relationships had their bumps. Maybe I was overthinking. But the bumps grew into bruises, emotional bruises. Shane's moods shifted unpredictably. One minute he was kind and attentive. The next, cold, distant, accusing. His notes changed tone, the poetry turning cryptic. "Don't disappoint me," one read, the words curling with menace. I tried to hold on to normalcy, but the tension at home thickened like storm clouds. I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid of the next shift in his mood. One night after I just finished a long shift, I came home to find my phone shattered on the floor. Shane accused me of hiding messages, lying, cheating. His voice rose, sharp and angry, words cutting deeper than any fist. I swallowed my fear and pain, not wanting to make things worse. But inside, a quiet panic settled. Then I found out I was pregnant. Joy and fear collided. The hope of new life clashed with the dread of what it might mean. Shane grew more possessive, more controlling. He monitored my calls, forbade me from leaving the apartment alone. The few friends I still trusted became distant whispers behind locked doors. "I'm doing this for us, for the baby," he told me one night, voice soft but firm. But those words felt like chains tightening around my throat. I started sneaking out after Shane fell asleep, craving the familiarity of the coffee shop, the soft hum of the espresso machine. Work became my refuge, the one place where I wasn't trapped, where the world felt a little less suffocating. The other baristas noticed. They didn't ask questions but offered quiet smiles, a hand on my shoulder, a warm cup without words. Their kindness was a fragile lifeline. One evening, I caught a regular customer watching me closely. He was older, kind eyes framed by wrinkles that spoke of years and wisdom. After a few days, he introduced himself as David, a social worker volunteering at a nearby shelter. I hesitated, then slowly began to share pieces of my story. David listened without judgment. He offered resources, hotlines, safe houses, counseling services. He didn't pressure me, just held the door open for when I was ready. The hope David gave me felt like a fragile ember. I wasn't sure if it would burn bright enough to light a path out of the darkness. Then came the night Shane found out I'd reached out. His rage was like nothing I'd seen before. Screaming, threats, pleading, all tangled into a dangerous storm. I feared for my safety and for the baby growing inside me. But when dawn broke, I found a sliver of courage I didn't know I had. With David's help, I called a hotline, arranged a place in a shelter. I packed a bag with trembling hands, left behind the life that was suffocating me. Leaving was terrifying. Shane begged, threatened, promised change. But I knew staying meant losing myself and my child. The shelter was not perfect, but it was safe. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of fear begin to lift, replaced by something I thought I'd lost: hope. Recovery is messy and slow. Some days the scars feel fresh. The fear doesn't just vanish overnight, but I'm learning to trust again, to rebuild a life piece by piece. I went back to school, finishing classes, dreaming bigger. The baristas at Starbucks became friends, part of a new family built on understanding and support. Most importantly, I'm learning that freedom isn't just a distant dream. It's the first step after fear. The choice to break the silence, to reach out, and to believe in something better. Now, when I pour a latte or wipe down a counter, I remember the journey, the nights I almost gave up and the mornings I chose to keep going. Because sometimes, the darkest places hold the brightest hope. Love should never feel like a cage. True strength is found not in control or fear, but in compassion, respect, and courage. When darkness closes in, reaching out for help is not weakness. It's the first step toward reclaiming your life. And even when scars remain, hope and healing are possible if we dare to believe in a better tomorrow. Moving into a new place should feel like a fresh start, a clean slate. But sometimes the past clings tighter than you expect. I'm Jordan Hale, 29, and just a few weeks ago I moved into a small townhouse on 52nd Street in Salem, Massachusetts. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind where neighbors nod hello and kids bike on the sidewalks. It was the kind of place Lisa and I thought we could finally settle in. Except for the burned-out Starbucks next door. The building was charred and blackened, windows shattered, walls stained with smoke and ash. The fire had happened months before I moved in, and though the city boarded it up, the smell of smoke still lingered faintly on the wind. It was a constant reminder that something had gone terribly wrong there. At first I tried to ignore it. After all, it wasn't my problem. But then the donuts started arriving. At exactly 6 a.m., every morning, I found a small cardboard box sitting on our doorstep. No note, no signature, just the box. And inside were donuts. Fresh donuts, glazed, chocolate, cinnamon twists, like they'd just come out of the oven. Lisa was fascinated. She was more open-minded than me about these strange gifts. "It's probably just a neighbor's way of welcoming us," she said cheerfully, reaching for a chocolate-glazed one. I warned her to be cautious, but she shrugged it off. I was skeptical. I set up a small security camera near the door, hoping to catch whoever was dropping off the boxes. But every morning I'd check the footage and see nothing. No footsteps, no car, no person, just the box sitting there like a ghost delivery. Lisa's curiosity grew into something more. She started waking earlier, almost drawn by the box. I found her standing by the door one morning, eyes wide, clutching a half-eaten donut like it was something precious. "Lisa, maybe we should just throw these away," I suggested quietly. She smiled at me, but there was something strange behind it. "It's nothing, Jordan," she said, voice soft and distant. "Just donuts." But I wasn't convinced. In the days that followed, Lisa changed. The playful curiosity turned into obsession. She spoke less to me and more to herself, murmuring things I couldn't quite catch. One night, I overheard her whispering about the fire's hunger and how the donuts called her. I tried to brush it off as stress or maybe a strange side effect of moving. But when she started waking in the middle of the night, wandering toward the burned Starbucks ruins, I knew something was seriously wrong. One night I confronted her in the kitchen where she stood holding a donut, trembling. "Lisa, please, you can't keep eating those," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked up at me with glassy eyes. "They need me," she said simply. "Who needs you?" I asked, heart pounding. "The fire," she whispered. "It's hungry. It wants more." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just a simple gift or prank. Something dark had attached itself to those donuts, and to Lisa. I begged her to stop, to throw them away, to get help, but she only smiled, a hollow, empty smile, and slipped out the door in the dead of night. I had no choice but to follow. Lisa's footsteps were slow but determined as she approached the blackened shell of the Starbucks. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. The smell of smoke was stronger here, mixed with something metallic and sharp. I called her name softly, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were empty, her face pale in the moonlight. "You can't stop it," she said suddenly, turning toward me. Her voice was no longer hers, cold and distant. "The fire wants more, and soon, so will you." Panic gripped me. "Lisa, come back inside, this isn't you." She shook her head slowly. "Those donuts, they're the offering. You don't understand. This fire, it's alive. It feeds on pain, on fear." I wanted to reach out to pull her away, but she took a step back, slipping further into the shadows. I watched helplessly as she disappeared into the ruins. When morning came, she was gone. The next morning, I found another box on the doorstep. Inside was a single donut, half eaten. I called every hospital, every shelter, but there was no sign of Lisa. Days turned into weeks. The empty townhouse felt colder, the silence louder. I stopped eating the donuts, but the boxes kept arriving. Sometimes I'd find a faint ash smell on my clothes or feel a sudden cold draft in the middle of the room. I tried to tell friends, but they chalked it up to stress or my imagination running wild. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Something from that burned Starbucks didn't burn out with the fire. It lingered, feeding off the darkness, growing stronger. And now, it's waiting. I'm still here, waiting, watching every morning for that box to appear. Each donut feels heavier, as if it carries a weight no pastry should have. I'm afraid that Lisa isn't gone, that she's become part of whatever this darkness is. And now, I might be next. I've tried to leave, but the donuts come with me. Always. Even miles away, the boxes find a way to show up. I don't know what this fire is, or what it wants, but I know one thing. Some things burn deeper than buildings. Some fires never go out, and some gifts are better left unopened. Not all gifts are kind, and curiosity can lead us into darkness we never expected. Sometimes what seems like a simple kindness hides a deeper danger. Trust your instincts, respect the past, and remember, some fires can't be extinguished, and the shadows they cast can change lives forever. The summer of 2024 in Albany was sticky, humid and heavy with that slow kind of heat that made the city feel like it was holding its breath. I'm Claire Donovan, 27, and on that late July afternoon, I was looking forward to something simple. Meeting my friends Mia and Harper at the new Starbucks downtown. Coffee's never been my thing. Too bitter, too dark. But I loved the cafes for what they were. Pockets of calm, places where you could sink into the background and just breathe. It was our weekly ritual, a moment to catch up between the chaos of work and life. That day, though, as I stepped through the glass doors, the usual hum felt off. The place was busy, full of people, students, professionals, a few tourists, but there was a strange quiet hovering over everything. The normal buzz of conversation, the laughter and music, it all felt muted. Like the air had thickened. I shrugged it off. telling myself maybe it was just the heat, or everyone was tired from the relentless summer. We got in line, chatting about everything and nothing. The new band Mia was obsessed with, Harper's promotion at work, my terrible attempts at cooking. Then, my eyes caught him. A man sitting alone near the window. He wore a faded leather jacket and jeans, nothing flashy. But it was his eyes that unsettled me. Sharp, cold, like he was measuring us, me, carefully, calculating something I couldn't quite place. His gaze lingered longer than it should have. It was like he was silently saying, "I see you." Suddenly his voice cut through my thoughts. Calm but with an edge that sent a chill through me. "You look like you don't belong here," he said. I blinked, caught off guard. I forced a smile, hoping it was just a bad joke. "We're just here to catch up." He nodded slowly, but didn't look away. His eyes were fixed on me, and that wasn't lost on Mia or Harper. I whispered to them after we ordered, trying to sound casual but failing. "We should keep an eye on him," Mia said softly. The rest of the afternoon passed with a dull tension that I couldn't shake. We left the cafe, promising to stroll through the nearby boutiques, hoping to clear the heaviness hanging over me. The boutiques downtown were a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere at Starbucks. Lush Fashion, a small clothing store just a few blocks away, was bright and fragrant with fresh fabric and perfume. Mia and Harper split up to browse, and I headed to the changing rooms, trying to shake off the unease. When I stepped out of the fitting room, my heart nearly stopped. There he was, the man from the cafe, leaning casually against a rack of dresses, blocking the exit. His smile was thin, barely a smile at all, more like a warning. "Looking for someone?" he asked quietly. I froze, swallowing hard. "No, just shopping." His eyes narrowed slightly, voice dropping to a whisper. "You can't run from me." Panic surged through me. My mind scrambled for options. I tried to sidestep, but he moved closer, the space shrinking around me. Just then, Mia and Harper appeared behind me like a lifeline. "Claire, come on," Harper said, grabbing my arm. Relief was immediate. I didn't hesitate. We pushed past him and headed for the door. Outside, the noise and chaos of the city hit me like a wave. The tension in my chest didn't ease. "Should we call the police?" Mia asked. I nodded, voice still shaky. "Yeah, he's been following us." We spotted a police officer walking nearby and hurried over, breathless and shaken. I explained everything, the man's stare in the cafe, the way he followed us here, how he cornered me. The officer listened carefully, jotting down notes. "We'll keep an eye out," he said, his tone serious. "You trust your instincts and stay safe. Thank you for reporting this. It's important that night sleep evaded me." The man's cold eyes haunted every shadow in my room, and I replayed his words over and over. "You can't run from me." I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't before. But I also felt something stronger, resolve. I wasn't going to let fear take over my life. The next day, I researched stalking and personal safety, learning how to document incidents, how to protect myself without letting paranoia rule. Days later, the police called with news that sent a shiver through me. The man was wanted for stalking several young women in the area. His pattern was chilling, watching, following, intimidating, but never physically attacking. Apparently, this was his way of controlling, terrifying, and isolating his victims before things escalated. I felt a wave of relief and fear. Relief that I wasn't alone. Fear that I'd come dangerously close. My friends and I grew closer in those weeks. We looked out for one another, shared rides, checked in constantly. I started carrying pepper spray and changed my routine, always making sure someone knew where I was. The city felt different, both more dangerous and more protective at once. Looking back, that summer changed me in ways I never expected. I still visit cafes, I still meet my friends, but I never ignore that sinking feeling when something feels wrong. I learned to listen to my gut, to trust my voice when I say, "This isn't okay." And I learned the power of community, that friends, neighbors, even strangers can make a difference when you speak up. Fear can be paralyzing, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes survival means standing in the light and refusing to be a shadow. The world isn't always safe, and sometimes danger wears a quiet face. But trusting yourself, speaking up, and leaning on those around you can turn fear into strength. Shadows may follow us, but they don't have to define us. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to move forward despite it. My name is Elliot Grant, and for the past 10 years my life has been defined by airports, hotels, and the endless cycle of business trips. As a 34-year-old consultant specializing in corporate strategy, I'm used to being a stranger in countless towns, always just passing through, never really settling. My suitcase is practically an extension of my hand. But on that rainy Tuesday morning in late October 2023, I felt different, more tired than usual, more vulnerable. I had just landed in Ashbourne, Vermont, a small city with a population barely enough to fill a stadium. My flight was delayed for nearly 2 hours, the kind of delay that frays your nerves and steals your focus. I was running through the mental checklist for the big presentation I had to deliver in just a few hours. Decks, talking points, stakeholder profiles. I'd reviewed it all on the plane, but now I needed a jolt of caffeine to snap me out of the fog. As I left the tiny regional airport building, the cold rain hit me like a shock. I pulled my coat tighter and scanned the quiet street. Then I saw it. A small coffee shop nestled between a bookstore and a florist. Its warm amber light spilled onto the slick pavement, inviting me in. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Willow Brew Cafe, open early." Desperate, I didn't hesitate. The bell chimed softly as I entered. The air smelled like roasted beans and something faintly sweet, mixed with the dampness of autumn. The cafe was nearly empty, a few tables scattered with morning readers and a lone laptop glow. Indie music played softly in the background, something low and melodic that almost made me forget the rain outside. Behind the counter stood the barista. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with striking green eyes and hair dyed a vivid blue. Her smile was warm but fleeting, like she was hiding something behind it. "Morning. What can I get you?" she asked, her voice light but carrying an edge I couldn't quite place. "Just a black coffee, no sugar," I said, rubbing the tiredness from my eyes. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She moved with a quiet precision as she prepared my order. I watched the steam rise from the cup, then noticed her reaching for a small white powder next to the grinder. Before I could say anything, she stirred it into the coffee. "Hey, I said no sugar," I said, frowning. She turned slowly, her smile now brittle, strained. She said softly, "It's just a little something to help you relax." My stomach twisted. Something felt off, but before I could react, she stepped aside and blocked the only exit. From the shadows near the door, 2 large men in hooded jackets stepped forward, faces obscured. The warmth of the cafe vanished. The panic hit me like a wave. I realized I was trapped. Time seemed to slow as the 2 men closed in. I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. I glanced around the cafe, hoping someone might be there to help, but it was dead quiet except for the low music. The blue-haired barista's smile never wavered. If anything, it grew colder. "Look, I don't want trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to leave." One of the men grunted, stepping closer. "Relax, Elliot. You're just our guest for a while." My blood ran cold. How did they know my name? I had never been here before. Why me? Desperation took over. My eyes landed on the cup of coffee still in my hand. The steaming liquid was scorching hot. Without thinking, I hurled it at the closest man's face. He screamed, stumbling backward, clutching at his eyes. The other man lunged for me, but I ducked and bolted toward a side door I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar. I pushed through and burst into the alley behind the cafe, rain pelting my face. I ran without looking back, adrenaline carrying me faster than I thought possible. Once I hit the main street, I slowed, gasping for breath. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm but skeptical when I gave them the address. Willow Brew Cafe listed in this town. Are you sure about the location? Sir, there's no. I double-checked the address. Yes, it's right across from the bookstore. There was a pause. We don't have any records for that business, sir. Confused and shaken, I hung up. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to focus on the presentation, but my mind kept flashing back to the coffee shop, the barista's eyes, the men, the strange powder in my drink. Why was I targeted? What was the purpose of this trap? Later that evening, I searched the internet for any mention of Willow Brew Cafe. Nothing. No website, no reviews, no social media presence. It was like the place didn't exist. My phone buzzed with work messages, but I barely responded. My body was starting to protest, dizziness creeping in, blurry spots in my vision. By bedtime, I was nauseous and weak. The next day, I went to a local urgent care clinic. The doctor ordered blood tests and a toxicology screen. When the results came back, the diagnosis unsettled me even further. You have traces of a potent anesthetic in your system, the doctor explained. Something we normally use for sedation in medical procedures, not something found in food or drink. I tried to wrap my head around it. Someone had tried to knock me out, possibly abduct me. But why? And who? Determined not to be a victim, I started piecing together the days leading up to the incident. My work didn't seem to have enemies or clients who'd want to harm me. The whole thing felt personal, but the logic was missing. I reached out to the airport security and local police explaining what happened, but without proof or footage, they were limited in how much help they could offer. Friends urged me to take time off, but that wasn't easy. My job demanded I push forward no matter what, yet the sense of unease lingered like a shadow. Every time I passed an unfamiliar cafe or shop, my skin crawled. Then, I got an anonymous message on social media. Not every stop is safe. Watch your back, Elliot. The word sent chills through me. Someone was watching. Months passed, and the incident remained unresolved. I changed routines, switched flights, avoided Ashbourne entirely. But the experience left a lasting mark. The encounter with Willow Brew Cafe taught me something vital. Danger often hides in plain sight, cloaked behind friendly faces and comforting routines. It reminded me how quickly the ordinary can turn sinister when we lower our guard. Now, whenever I find myself in a new place, I remind myself to stay alert, to trust my instincts, and to question even the most familiar surroundings. Because sometimes, the last stop isn't just a place to rest. It's the moment when your survival instincts need to be strongest. Safety isn't guaranteed by familiarity or routine. It requires vigilance and awareness, especially in places that seem ordinary and harmless. Trust your instincts, speak up when something feels wrong, and remember that sometimes, survival depends on noticing the shadows lurking just beyond the light. My name is Lila Morgan, and I never imagined a breakup could shatter my world so completely. I was 29, working at the Starbucks on 118 Riverbend Road, in a small Vermont town called Ashwood, a place that seemed peaceful enough, with its quiet streets and cozy shops. But peace, I learned, can be an illusion. The trouble began when Damon Pierce and I broke up. Damon wasn't just any guy. He was a local artist with a large social media following, a cult of fans who hung on his every post. When we split, Damon spun the story in his favor, painting me as the villain. Overnight, my social media accounts filled with hateful messages, threats, and whispers that I was unstable, dangerous even. My confidence crumbled. I kept telling myself to log off, but the addiction to the digital world, our world, was too strong. I couldn't escape. My best friend Naomi begged me to stay away from the chaos online. Don't let him win by feeding the fire. You need space, Lila. But I couldn't. I kept scrolling, reading, hurting. Then the worst happened. Damon vanished. His car was found abandoned near the very Starbucks where I worked. His phone was missing, no trace of where he had gone. The police in this small town moved slowly. Rumors swirled like the falling autumn leaves. Had he run away? Was he hurt or worse? Naomi warned me, "Lila, small towns have shadows. You don't know what you're walking into." But something inside me refused to ignore the feeling that Damon was in trouble, that the darkness haunting us hadn't let go. So, without telling a soul, I packed my bags, left my city apartment, and drove nearly 5 hours into the heart of Vermont. Ashwood greeted me with misty hills and the faint smell of pine. The Starbucks was busier than usual for a Sunday morning. Farmers, families, tourists, people who came for a quiet coffee break. I felt my heart pound when I saw Ethan, the young barista I'd heard about from Damon. He was tall with a nervous energy, and when I approached, his eyes quickly flicked around before he spoke. "Damon came here a few days ago. He wasn't alone." My breath caught. "Who with?" Ethan hesitated. "Some guy, rough-looking like he didn't belong, cold eyes, menacing." My mind raced. That description felt too familiar. Marcus Lane. The name twisted in my gut like a knife. Marcus was the nightmare I had escaped years ago, a controlling, abusive man whose shadow still lingered in my darkest memories. Could he have found Damon? Ethan handed me a cracked phone Damon left behind. The screen flickered, but one message was clear. "Please help." Next to the phone lay a broken bracelet, one I'd once given Marcus, a silent scream from the past. I knew then that this was more than a missing person case. It was a dark thread pulling me back into a nightmare I thought I'd escaped. The cold Vermont air bit at my cheeks as I sat outside the Starbucks, phone in hand, staring at the fractured screen. I called the local police station, trying to push past my nerves. "Detective Harper?" I asked, hoping to reach someone in charge. "I'm Lila Morgan. Damon Pierce left this phone here. There's a message. Please help him. I think Marcus Lane is involved." There was a long silence. "Ms. Morgan, we're aware of Damon's disappearance, but there's little we can do without solid leads. Ashwood is a quiet town. We don't deal with much beyond traffic tickets and noise complaints." Her voice was polite but firm. Small towns had their priorities, and Damon's case wasn't high on the list. I felt frustration coil tight inside me. I couldn't wait for others to act. I had to do something. That afternoon, I borrowed Ethan's old Jeep. The vehicle rattled down narrow country roads flanked by dense forests, the trees like silent sentinels watching my every move. I asked Ethan everything I could about Damon's last visit. "He seemed scared," Ethan said quietly. He didn't want to talk about it, but he looked over his shoulder. I overheard the other guy, Marcus, telling Damon to keep quiet or else. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Marcus's threats were real. I drove for hours following the directions Ethan gave me. Abandoned barns, rundown farms, places off the map. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised purples. At one point, I stopped by a diner to gather information. The locals eyed me suspiciously when I mentioned Marcus Lane. The stories whispered in hushed tones confirmed my worst fears. Marcus was dangerous, unpredictable, and still held a tight grip on fear. I didn't sleep that night. The woods outside my motel room felt alive, watching. The next morning, I set out again before dawn, guided by a fading memory Ethan had shared. A barn on the outskirts, overgrown with weeds, the kind of place no one visited unless they wanted to disappear. Driving through the thick fog, the Jeep's headlights pierced the mist, illuminating patches of cracked asphalt and tangled brush. When I found the barn, it looked abandoned, rotting wood, rusted hinges. But the door was slightly ajar. My heart hammered as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of hay and something sour. I called out softly, "Damon?" A faint rustling answered me. There he was, huddled in a corner, thin, pale, eyes wide with fear. "Lila." His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. I rushed to him, pulling him into a shaky embrace. "I'm here. You're safe now." He told me everything. Marcus had tracked him down, using intimidation to silence Damon's attempts to speak out. Damon had gone into hiding but had run out of options. As we spoke, I saw the bruises, the weariness in his hands. The broken bracelet was Marcus's warning. Suddenly, the barn door creaked open. My heart froze. Marcus stepped inside, his eyes cold and sharp as a blade. He hadn't expected me. His presence was like a thunderclap in the silence, threatening and heavy. "Lila," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You don't belong here." I stood firm. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." He laughed, a hollow sound. "You should be." Damon moved behind me, weak but protective. I knew we couldn't face Marcus alone. I shouted for Damon to run while I tried to keep Marcus talking. The struggle was brief, but intense. I caught a glimpse of Marcus's face contorted with rage as he disappeared into the woods, leaving us trembling but alive. The night air wrapped around us, cold and unforgiving. I held Damon close, knowing this wasn't over. The police arrived shortly after, roused by a local hiker who'd seen a shadowy figure sprinting through the trees. Officers searched the area, but Marcus was gone, swallowed by the vast Vermont wilderness. Back in the town, I realized that Ashwood's quiet streets hid more than just rolling hills. They concealed secrets, fear, and shadows from the past. Damon and I found safety together, but the scars remained. I stayed longer than planned, helping Damon regain his footing, reclaiming my own strength in the process. The long drive to Ashwood had been more than a journey across miles. It was a passage through fear, memory, and resilience. Sometimes, the past catches up with you, and sometimes, you have to face the darkness to find the light. Healing begins when you confront your fears and refuse to be silenced. No matter how deep the shadows, courage and support can lead you back to safety and peace. But you must listen to your instincts and never ignore the signs that something is wrong.